Welcome to CivilNet. My guest today from Tbilisi, Georgia is Livny, an economist who runs ISET, which is both a think tank as well as a graduate university for economics. Eric, thank you for joining us on CivilNet.
Thank you.
Eric, April 1 this year was a good year for the Caucasus. You apparently were in Geneva and you were witness to an amazing historic occurrence, the formation of what you call the Transcaucasan Confederation, which maybe some of us in the Caucasus would prefer to call the Caucasus Confederation. But tell me how and why you think this entity is going to be a good thing.
I think this entity is something that we've been all dreaming about for years and years. I've been long enough in the Caucasus or Transcaucasus since 2007 to see that the borders that we have drawn in the region make it very difficult for all of us to work together, to travel, to trade, to develop. So this development is something that is going to be good for all of us.
And you there with the three flags of the three republics that will form a part of this confederation have in this amazing document that you have on the ISET site, which we will be sharing, dealt with probably every sticky point. You've dealt with borders, you've dealt with flags, you've even dealt with alphabet. Which one do you think was I was going to say which one do you think would be hardest to sell, but if we're going to keep the scenario going, which one was the hardest to sell?
Well, the hardest was the alphabet, I must say, given the differences between the three alphabets that are in use currently in the region. We decided, not I decided, but the leaders of the three countries decided to keep all three and build a huge alphabet tower right at the intersection of the three borders, commemorating these alphabets.
And we're not going to call it the Tower of Babel, right?
No.
That you've modeled this confederation. Go ahead.
This turned out to be an easy problem to solve.
The alphabets, right?
Yes.
You've modeled this confederation very much on the Swiss Confederation.
Don't make this mistake. I didn't model anything. It was the leaders of the three countries that came up with this model.
So Gharibishvili, Aliyev, and Sarkisian had the vision.
Yes, absolutely. It was amazing to see them, these dynamics within the group. You know, within days, they changed their minds. It was unbelievable.
What do you think the incentive was?
Look, I think the economic incentives were there all the time. You know it from the Armenian perspective. Being isolated, being cut off from the rest of the world is not a pleasant situation to be in. So the incentives are definitely there. But I think what was the trigger was the developments in Ukraine, surprisingly enough.
Go ahead. What do you mean?
Look, what happened in Ukraine, the conflict between Ukraine and Russia nowadays, it creates a huge opportunity for the Caucasus to compete with Ukraine and Russia for traffic, for trade going through these two countries to Central Asia. You know, Caucasus has been historically part of the Silk Road. So unfortunately, the cost of moving goods across the Caucasus have increased dramatically given the lack of infrastructure and the deterioration of the existing infrastructure.
And the closed borders.
Of course, and the closed borders. Now, with the fact that Russia and Ukraine became competitive made it very difficult for the Caucasus to basically attract investment into its infrastructure. The conflict provides an opportunity. And I think what happened really on the 31st of March, when the leaders grasped that the opportunity is there and decided to go for it. It was unbelievable.
I wish I'd witnessed it, but we're glad you witnessed it. You know, this document that describes the solutions to each of the sticky problems makes clear that each of these presidents had very wise economic advisors, if nothing else, because it's clear that this document presents political solutions to economic challenges.
Absolutely, but not only political, not only economic. It's much broader than that. I think it's really, we are moving here fully and finally into the 21st century. Now, when you look at Europe today, Europe has no borders. And remember, just 70 years ago, Europe was in one big mess, big fight, a scramble.
You'd think we could read a history book, right?
Absolutely.
Tell us how you resolved the so-called frozen conflicts that affect all three of the countries.
I interviewed the Azerbaijani president at the very end of the press conference. What he basically said was that the borders that are very much arbitrary was a problem that we couldn't solve. They couldn't solve. You know, one country tries to move it to the left, the other tries to move it to the right, and in the end, what you have is a conflict. So the only way he could see the problem of frozen conflict resolved was to address the root cause of the problem, which is the border. Just eliminate it. Initially, what you can do is make it thinner, make it lower, allow people to travel, allow people to come into these frozen conflict areas, and in this way, to start communicating. And then over 5 years, a 5-year period of confidence building measures, you know, the borders will be finally eliminated as such, just like in Europe.
Sounds absolutely great. Tell us one more thing. How did you deal with the interests of the global powers in the region, the Collective Security Organization, NATO? What do we do with alliances?
Well, this is another major issue. You see, in the current situation, when the Caucasus is divided, the great powers are trying to divide it even further, and each one is trying to pull one or the other country into its own alliance. Just now, we've seen about a month ago, Armenia being pulled away from Europe into the so-called Eurasian Union, at the same time as Georgia is trying to jump onto the European Union, and Azerbaijan is somewhere in between, undecided. Now, with the Transcaucasian or Caucasian Confederation being formed, all this haggling will be over. Instead of being pulled in different directions, the three countries will work in the same direction, and together they will have much more bargaining power. So they will be able to get a much better deal from both the West and Russia, and maybe China further, looking into the future. And that's how it should be. You know, each country taken alone is too small to be able to bargain, and they're being basically manipulated by the great powers, into disagreement, into fighting. So that the three leaders of the countries finally decided to go it together, which is something that will be in the history books.
Absolutely. Last question, the hardest one of all. Whose poetry is the best? What's the history book going to say?
Well, the history books is another major issue. I was really surprised to see how the leaders decided to treat history, because as we know, since independence, the three countries have very intensively engaged in rewriting history books.
Especially the recent history.
Of course, but essentially the 20th century and the 19th century history. So what the three leaders agreed is to form a joint task force, a broad regional task force, very much inclusive, not only Armenians, Azeris, and Georgians on it. In fact, other minorities would also be part of the task force to jointly come up with a way to rewrite all regional books and to come up with a single history book for the region in which all narratives will be combined into one Caucasus narrative of the history.
I think this is a great way to venture, as you said, into the 21st century. And if I want to speak for the Armenian population, I think so long as we get to say that both wine and beer were invented in Armenia, I think we would probably be on board.
And cognac was invented in Georgia.
Oh, now that's going to be a tough one. But we'll deal with that. We'll deal with that. Now that the other issues, the minor issues like borders, neutrality, maps, history books have been dealt with by the three visionary leaders, clearly with some help from visionary advisors, we'll manage to somehow deal with the rest of the issues.
That would be really fantastic. There's still a lot of work to be accomplished over the next 5 years. And I'm sure everybody outside will try to derail the deal that was achieved in Geneva just less than 10 days ago. So I think your audience, people in Armenia and certainly people in Azerbaijan and Georgia, should now stand firm and support their leadership. before, the reason you see three different flags behind me is because we have students from all three countries.
At ISET.
At ISET, way before April 1st, 7 years ago.
And this is simply the precursor to the Confederation.
Yeah, we got to go on it.
Well, April 1 was clearly a very important day in history for this region, for the Caucasus. Thank you, Eric Livny, for bringing it to our attention.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We've been speaking with Eric Livny of ISET, a think tank in Tbilisi, also a university, a graduate university program in economics. And thank you for following us on CivilNet. This is where you'll hear all of the historic news.